Elbaph's worst case scenario is here. Its gods have been subverted, perverted, and all hope deserted with the rise of Nika the Destroyer, as well as not just one but two Loci, and every other apocalyptic creature Norse mythology has to offer, including this guy's mum, the most fearsome of all of the Norse creatures. And the beginning of this chapter definitely tells me that the fun is over on Elbaph, because the very first thing we have is a great big Jormungandr attacking the kids of the Walrus School, and Elbaph is now rapidly descending into chaos on two fronts. So look, I'm gonna have to take back what I said about the Holy Knights. I was pretty disappointed, with the idea of Shamrock leaving. Really liked him. And I just didn't see these guys as a threat that could live up to him, but I have to say, they're doing a pretty damn good job. And something that I love is what so few manga, shonen villain groups do, is that they are working together. This is a cockishly well-organized plan to combine their abilities in the most catastrophic way possible, and I feel like it's gonna take a lot more than I originally thought to beat them. Luckily, a few characters are stepping up in this chapter, like Saul. Watching Saul in action was amazing, and I can't help but be reminded of Garth. Just a really solid one hockey fist Saul sort of approach. And I think there's a good chance that Saul was inspired by, if not trained under or with Garth, because in chapter 0 we do see Saul with the gaggle of vice admirals responding to Roger meeting Shiki at Ed War, and I'd have to believe that Saul followed more closely in line with Garth's sense of justice. And this page is mostly dedicated to Garth allies, with one exception, which is that you can see then Vice Admiral Sakazuki was also part of this force, so this page is almost like an Ohara incident reunion for the Marines, if reunions could take place 5 years before the event it is that they're acknowledging. And this was also confirmation that Saul is a Haki user, which makes sense because all Vice Admirals do need to be proficient in both armament and observation. But it's stuff like this that reminds you that Vice Admirals are no joke, or at least, they're not supposed to be. Vice Admirals have a pretty lackluster legacy in One Piece, whether it be any Slobby, the Paramount War, or Egghead Island. Every time they gather in their large Vice Admiral groups, they end up being a bit mostly useless and not an amazing representation of the theoretical power that they are supposed to command. But with Saul's punch, this is actually quite a clever pun in Japanese. The Kimatsu Shinken, which can mean both demon slaying punch as well as final exam. So it's very appropriate for punch fighting some demons in a school environment. And speaking of school environment, we also should not ignore Principal Kiba, because he has a very cool design, and I guess he's the guy that the Walrus School was named after, given his walrosity. I know Oda gets a little bit wacky with animal-inspired designs, but I have a hard time believing that Kiba is a full giant. He's got to be mixed in with some sort of fishman, and he may be a Wotan. Either way, I love the giant hammer, which is it's a very modern hammer with a claw at the back and everything. Very versatile. And he was a former member of the giant warrior pirate serving under Dory and Broggy. However, to the best of my knowledge, we've not actually seen Kiba before in either Dory and Broggy's flashback or Big Mom's flashback. But I think the reaction of the kids is very important in this scene, as they are awestruck by Saul and Kiba fighting to protect them. And this is probably showing them all for the first time what the ideal Elbaphian citizen used to be, even though Saul is not from here. But it's perhaps also showing them that this isn't something that should be so quickly abandoned. Much like the quest of award-winning flavor pursued by the sponsor of this video, Fume. But man on the internet, why do this thing it is you're talking about? Well, it's because we all have bad habits that we wish we could break, some worse than others. For example, I have a bad habit of opening up people's emails and just not replying to them for a few days, weeks, months, years. But these bad habits need changing. And Fume makes it incredibly easy to swap out the bad for something much more better. An award-winning flavored air experience that is not a vape, contains no nicotine, no batteries, and Fume cores are much closer to herbal teas, which you can use anywhere at a fraction of the cost of other bad habits. This is flavor for your mouth, not your lungs. And one such flavor would be the Cinnamon Hearts Core, to give you that warm embrace of a father's love before he goes off to die in glorious battle. It's a very specific flavor, you must try it. And then proceed to fidget with it, because even when I'm not using it for its flavored air functionality, I have these things with me at all times, just because they're stupidly fun. There's this very satisfying magnetic. And Fume have now served over 300,000 customers, and you could be another by going to my link in the description. Go to tryfume.com/grandlinereview or scan the QR code on screen and use my code grandlinereview to get a free Fume topper, a very awesome accessory to level up your experience when you order your journey pack today. And thank you so much to Fume, because it's their sponsorship that allows us to bring you the best fictional pirate content possible as often as possible. So definitely check them out. But for now, it's back to you, me, Thanks, me. And from here, I continue to be quite impressed and slightly disturbed by Gunko's devil fruit abilities. It's such an extremely versatile fruit. I love it. And in this case, Gunko is using the vectorial arrows to force the sleeping children to move in the direction of the arrow. And this whole part very much reminded me of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, a German legend of the Middle Ages. Allegedly, a piper was hired to deal with a rat infestation, so he played his pipe and took all the rats to a river. Job well done, except the mayor of the town refused to pay the piper for his services. So what the piper did, right? Epic prank, he used his abilities to do the exact same thing with all of the children in the town, played his pipe, led them all to a river, and drowned them. Or there's a more tame version where the piper uses the children as leverage to extort money from the village and then safely returns the children, but I'm more in favor of the first one. And one child who is notably missing from this chapter is Colin, who we haven't seen in quite a long while now. I believe the last time was in chapter 1135 when he was with Mama Ripley at the Walrus School, so I wonder what he's up to at the moment, and if he has somehow avoided the sleep powers of, I think, St. Killingham, which we'll talk about in a bit. If so, this is a prime opportunity, as all of the heavy hitters of the Straw Hats currently have a Loki issue, and every other giant on Elbaph are going to have their hands full with the colossal monsters summoned at the end of the chapter in that amazing 2-page spread. So who is left to save the children? Perhaps a Colin. But I want to go through what may have happened here. It would appear that St. Killingham, the Kirin guy, has an ability that can at the very least put people, or perhaps even children specifically, to sleep, and from that position he can conjure their greatest fears into reality. That, or it's actually a combination of abilities. St. Killingham's putting the children to sleep, and perhaps St. Summers has the ability to manifest the creatures. And we know that these creatures are real because Saul and Kiba, they had to beat the crap out of Jormungandr at the very beginning of the chapter. So these are not illusions, which makes these final 2 pages quite mind-boggling to comprehend, because these creatures absolutely dwarf the actual giants we see in front of them who traditionally dwarf us. They make Saul, Kiba, and Ange look like normal humans. But the kind of tragic aspect of this is that all of this was part of an exercise where Ange got the kids to draw what they most fear, which I imagine she must be regretting right about now, having added a very dangerous spice to our imagination hot pot. Although I do love the small section where the kids going through and arguing about who or what is going to destroy the world. Mostly because, yeah, Loki is the first thing that comes up, but the first drawing we see is actually of Nika. One of these Elbaphian children, when asked to draw the thing it is that they most fear, chose the sun god Nika. And the kids are even arguing over who's scarier, Loki or Nika, which I find fascinating because everyone on Elbaph so far has been quite welcoming of Luffy, and a few have even been anxious to see his sun god form. But there's clearly a sector of giant society who genuinely fear Nika as the destroyer. And the conjuration of Nika is pretty damn cool. I love that this nightmare Nika has a beard because, mate, of course he does. The giants of Elbaph believe that any one of them could become the sun god, so of course he's gonna have a beard like all of the manly giant men. And this also made me realize that there's something a bit different about the Elbaph Nika to the warrior god that we first heard about from Who's Who, which all has to do with some subtle positioning like the sword. In Who's Who's silhouette of the sun god, Nika's pose is more like someone valiantly marching into battle, raising the sword proudly over his head to liberate all of the good people, and generally holding it in a more honorable and knightly fashion, whereas the Elbaph depiction of Nika holds his sword almost like a massive dagger about to strike and impale his unsuspecting victims. Plus, the smile that Elbaph Nika has is more on the uncomfortable side than joyous. So we have one Nika depiction very much presenting a noble savior, whereas the other definitely fits the more destroyer interpretation. So I don't know how Elbaph is gonna pan out, or even if we're gonna address this, but should the giant see Luffy transform, he may not necessarily be viewed as the savior that some believe him to be, and it could cause further tensions, especially if word gets out that he was the one to free Loki. So at that point, if I'm a giant who believes in Nika the Destroyer, or even a giant that's, on the Nika fence, then I'm thinking that Luffy is now doing everything he can to erase my existence. And so Luffy may even get blamed for creating these nightmarish creatures if the Holy Knights are able to stay out of sight. Just because this does seem like the kind of apocalyptic ending to the world that was depicted in the Elbaph mural. All of these dark, simplistic monsters rising to do battle for all of existence. But what's also very exciting is that it appears appears that a second Loki has hit Elbaph, so we're now in a situation where we have Loki. And Nightmare Loki does seem to be carrying Ragnir. However, he's also holding a sword, which looks like a slightly exaggerated child's drawing of King Harald's sword, the one we currently believe to be lodged into the head of Jarl. And this is because the guard is very similar, and I've yet to see any other sword on Elbaph possess this style of guard. And this makes sense because all of the kidlets have been taught that Loki murdered Harald and then whacked Jarl in the head. So of course the evil incarnation of Loki is going to be carrying the King's Blade as well. Although at first I thought this sword might be a reference to the giant sword skewering Elbaph, but they really don't look alike. And it's crazy that we still haven't found out anything about that, by the way. That would have been one of my first questions as a Straw Hat stepping onto this island. What is with that? But the other thing that really excites me about having two Lokis is that we may see a direct and literal contrast between how the Giants of Elbaph view Loki through this nightmare form against the reality of who Loki actually is. That the real Loki might be a much nicer guy. Or if he's not, then the real Loki is significantly more horrible than even a child's imagination could conjure. Either way, I'm looking forward to it. But also making an appearance is Fenrir, which is a design that I love. But Fenrir is a creature we've been talking about a lot ever since Elbaph first began, even suspecting that Loki may have a Fenrir devil fruit. And before that, it was also suspected that Vigeland Garling may have a Fenrir fruit. He's a very popular creature. But with Loki, it's because Fenrir was said to be bound to a rock until the commencement of Ragnarok, like Loki being tied to the tree. Although I feel like seeing Fenrir here makes that less likely though, because the kids clearly believe these to be separate entities. We also have what I believe is pronounced as a Draugr, which is this skelly dude here, which is sort of like old Norse zombies, but occasionally linked to the concept of more vampiric creatures as well. We also have a Nidhogg, a big wormy sort of thing that likes to nom nom the world tree. In addition to that, one of the kids most fears ghosts, which are definitely not high on my list compared to everything else we have here. And we also have physical manifestation of the concept of a storm, which very reasonably strongly resembles Zeus, and I wonder if this is setting up a potential battle between thunderclouds. However, we have yet to touch on my favorite nightmare creature so far, because there's a really funny moment in the flashback where all of the kids are arguing about what's more scary, and in among all of the standard suggestions, your Lokis, your Storms, your Nikas, one of the kids yells out, "My mum." And I really do not want you to miss this, because this kid's mother is actually in the very left-hand side of this 2-page spread, and to be fair to the kid, she looks horrifying. Although I have to say, when I first caught sight of this particular nightmare, I thought that it might be Big Mom. Not the real Big Mom, she still hasn't finished her lava bath, but the conjuration of a story that may be told about Charlotte Lin, one of the greatest enemies of Elbaph, and someone well worth being feared on the same level as Loki. And if these powers keep introducing new fears, then I think making a Nightmare Big Mom would be a very fun way to incorporate her Elbaph legacy into this arc. It doesn't have to be a major threat that we focus on, or even anything, more than just a page of seeing her. And maybe it could be her child self instead of her adult self, because the story would only be told about what she did as, what was she, 5 to 6 years old? But all in all, this is a pretty horrifying power that ties annoyingly nicely into one of the overall motifs of the final saga, which is imagination and belief. Currently, what we've been exploring are the positives of imagination through Luffy in Gear 5th, as well as Jewelry Bonnie being able to conjure any future that she genuinely believes could exist, not to mention Vegapunk's hypothesis on devil fruits being humanity's drive for imagination and evolution, although I guess I did mention it. But I like that what's happening here now is an application of the danger of imagination, because belief is not always a positive thing, and it can also be quite a self-fulfilling prophecy at times. If you properly believe that the worst is going to happen, then you're subconsciously going to work towards it. Not because you're actively seeking it out, but because you are not resisting it because you've already accepted it. And the strength of all of these nightmare creatures may be directly tied to how powerful each and every child believes them to be. So for example, in the case of Nika, if that one kid believed that he was unbeatable and going to destroy the world, then is that what becomes reality through this conjured Nika? Is this Nika unbeatable? Also, I'm not sure if we're quite there yet, but this chapter has potentially done a very standard One Piece thing of setting a clock, a countdown to disaster, as we now have an undefined time limit to keep track of, which is that when the kids reach the ship, they're abducted, and I guess we lose. There's probably going to be a lot more to it than that. In later arcs, it's very difficult to have a countdown to destruction that doesn't involve the fate of the entire literal island, but a clock is now present regardless. Well, that's before mentioning our other key threat here that has potentially set another big clock with all the fire fire. Last week, we went over a lot of fun subversive ideas about Loki, but after being mostly unshackled, he's played very much into straight expectations here, becoming a very threatening antagonist, and he does use Ragnir, which is now confirmed to have lightning summoning powers. And this may be the biggest lightning attack we've ever seen in the series. In fact, just one of the biggest attacks in general, because I know it doesn't look hugely impressive in the manga, but you need to remember the scale of Elbaph. This is the kind of attack that is completely covering and destroying almost any regular island in the One Piece world. The blast is that big, so Ragnir is practically an ancient weapon in its own right. And I now feel a bit more confident in thinking that the cut branch of an Atom Tree from the last chapter was most likely Loki inflicted, and I can definitely see why he is so incredibly feared by the giants now. Because Loki is actually capable of literally destroying all of Elbaph with significantly more ease than I was expecting. And remember that this is just a demonstration of Ragnir. Yes, there are ideas that it may be an object imbued with the legendary Devil Fruit power, but it's very possible that we haven't even seen Loki's true abilities yet, that there is no fruit in use. Although something that does make Hammer Fruit more likely is that Dr. Vegapunk did visit Elbaph, and a mischievous young Loki could have found his way into some sort of secret research that just so happened to be about imbuing fruits into objects, and he said to himself, Loki, mate, you have the opportunity to do the greatest thing ever with this here hammer. And also a very important note about the hammer, it does appear that Loki is imbuing it with Haki, as it's making the trail effect of Conqueror's Haki, which I think is to be expected with any endgame One Piece strong guy. We've just reached the point where it's difficult to create a character worth paying attention to that isn't a Conqueror's Haki user, but it also makes sense because of everyone we've met with Conqueror's Haki, Loki may be the one with the greatest sense of those kingly qualities. In fact, he goes well beyond that, because most conquerors have the ambition to become the pirate king, or in Doflamingo's case, he takes a step further as king of the world, but no one else so far has had the ambition to become an outright god and destroy the world. Although there is a chance that Roxy Zebek may have possessed a very similar kind of ambition, but that is a story for not now. However, Loki, I don't even really know what to believe here, but if I am to take his words seriously, and I guess I have no reason not to at the moment, he doesn't say that he wants to destroy Elbaph. He says, if you want to save it. So it seems more like he's using the island as leverage to get out of that final shackle, and that he can't really be his true self until he's completely free, which is also very Sun God-esque. And he may even have aimed that lightning blast directly for a spot on the island with no village. But it is going to be interesting to see how Luffy grapples with this, though. In this chapter, we don't get a lot of Luffy, but there is definite shock and appall towards what Loki is doing. So it's a situation where Luffy's eyes and mind are telling him one thing, but his intuition is telling him another. And I don't really know how Luffy deals with this. He's not really one to negotiate, and I guess his logic was, look, if Loki starts being a dick, then I'ma thwack him in the dick. So this does feel like a very good potential setup for a Luffy versus Loki round 1? And if so, I very much look forward to Loki's reaction to Luffy being immune to lightning, as well as discovering the Gear 5th form, and I do wonder if this could be Luffy's first real challenge since attaining Gear 5th, facing off against a man who is determined to inherit and steal Luffy's legacy as his own. So this could be a very personal fight, and one that unfortunately prevents Luffy from helping out elsewhere with the Plague of Holy Knights. And thank you so much again to Fume for sponsoring this video. Definitely check them out through the link in the description.